Hi, this is Peter Rutter from VFE Pedals. I wanted to make you guys at madbeanpedals just a quick video to show you how I finish out the build. This video is not intended to show you like how to solder, read a resistor, all those kind of things. I'm just going to assume that either you know how or you can use YouTube for those things. So it's going to walk you through the process of kind of just a little bit of quirks that I have to go through as I sort of finalize the build on these pedals. This is particularly tailored if you plan on using a 1590B enclosure in Hammond 1590B or similar. I've instructed Pedal Parts Plus, which I'll put a link in, right here and down in the description, that you can request from them the drilling template that we used. And so it's free for you to use. Obviously you got to pay them for that. And so if you want to build it to the exact specs, that's really great. There's a couple of caveats though that I do want to make clear. One, obviously you can't put VFE on the pedal. Even though it's my design, it's not my build, so I don't want it to be represented as if it was a VFE product. Obviously that would create some confusion. The other thing is, please don't email me with questions about mods or how to troubleshoot a DIY circuit. I'm handing these over to madbeanpedals at no cost because I want you the opportunity to build it, but I just don't have the time to manage those questions. And so you need to, if you have those questions, please use the forum. And if there's a question that no one can seem to ask, Brian has access to me and he can ask those questions for you. So anyway, if you could do me that huge favor, that'll save me a ton of time teaching full time. I still have a business to run. I've got a lot on my plate, and so it would really help if you could direct those questions to the forum. All right. Hopefully this video helps you get making some of my original pedal designs, and hope you enjoy them. Thanks. Alright, so I have a soldered up board and I have soldered in the potentiometers. I wanted to note a few things on this. One, and it might be a little hard, let me zoom in here. That's about as far as zoom in, so I'm going to zoom in. You can see right here, I haven't soldered this leg. I just wanted you to see how there's a little bit of a gap. And that's because with the dust cap that I put on here to prevent the pot from shorting out with the solder joints, it's raised up a little bit off the board, and so in order for it to sit nice and parallel up here to the board, you have to raise these legs up a bit. If you don't, then you're going to get some things that are twisted and or bent, and it's going to be under too much tension. And might eventually even crack over a lifetime of using the pedal. Also, you can see I put on dust caps. You can also put on or just put underneath like electrical tape or some sort of bumpers, anything to isolate the potentiometer from the board, because you don't want to short those. I like to solder these pots in before I put them in the board, but I don't solder any of these smaller parts, which I'll put in just a second to show you. These ribbon cables are what I use to attach this board to the switching board. So these are ribbon cables. I'll put the part number up that I use, but you don't even have to use ribbon cables. I use a ribbon cable that's actually 6 across, and then I just use scissors to snip it in half, and then yeah, so anyway, that's that. I'll show you what it looks like once I put in the other components. Alright, here all the parts are in the board, all the other pots. So these ones though, so I soldered up the leg that wasn't soldered here. So I've soldered these 3 up, but I have not soldered these in. And the reason why is these are panel mounted for one. And so they've also got some wiggle room in terms of the fact that they can kind of bend and shift even when they're soldered in just a little bit without putting too much tension. So if there's needing for something to shift ever so slightly, nope, not a problem. However, These ones, if you solder them in, there's no wiggle room. And so if they need to bend or shift, you have to desolder them in order to do so. So I leave that process till after they've been installed into the system. And also, I should note this, the LED goes into this board. The right leg, there's a positive marking on the silk screen on the other side, but just the long leg, the positive leg, is the right side. It's the middle of these two holes in the board there. And so this right here, the board is set up to be installed into the case. Alright, this is the other circuit board. It contains, this circuit board is what was key to me being able to do a lot of custom work. So it's one circuit board that adapts to any of the pedals. The most common thing is the adding of a charge pump, or actually a voltage inverter, so I could feed any pedal positive voltage and negative voltage, both power rails. And so this one's using a lot of pedals. And so, but some of the other ones, like some of them are just regular pedals, and so all they have is this voltage limiter here, 18 volts, 20 volts. It's a Zener diode. It's a protection diode in case of overvoltage, so it's not even really necessary for the circuit. It's just an overvoltage protector. This here would be for like the Fire Red Horse, or the old school, I think, also has this. This is a lower voltage voltage protector. I think it's about 16 volts, because those ones already have charge pumps built in into the other part of the circuit board, and so they can't handle 18 volts, and so that's to protect that. Also, like the Merman has even a lower voltage one. So those are all listed on the board. Right here you can see the one sort of outlier on all these. Most of them are either charge pump or just a single voltage protector, and this section is empty. But the one outlier is the Choral Reef, which also has a voltage divider circuit, which I just realized is right now is missing a part. Good thing I checked that. Anyway, so there's two resistors here for the voltage divider. I am missing the capacitor, which I'll grab in really quickly. Okay, so this is actually a good thing because there's one quirk here. So you can see how the polarity is actually marked for the charge pump, and if you're doing it in the Choral Reef, the polarity on the one that you're actually using is reversed. So you're going to use this top one, and it'll say ground on one side, and in the charge pump scenario, the ground is for the positive leg, but in the Choral Reef scenario, it's the opposite, because it's not a voltage inverter, it's a voltage divider. So anyway, so I put in this, just for the Choral Reef, and only for the Choral Reef, I put the long leg not in the square hole. I put the short leg in the square hole. Anyway, so kind of glad I left that out so that I remembered to tell you that. Anyway, so I need to solder that in and all that. I will note that when I soldered up this board, there's a couple of unique things. One, the 150U filter capacitor here is put on the underside of the board. This is only necessary if you're fitting it in the Hammond 1590B or similar enclosure, because there's just not enough height on the other side of the board. You need a lot of short components, so I put it on the underside. Fits really nicely. And then I soldered in the power jack, but I only soldered in one leg, and that's so that when we do the installation process, which there will be some tolerance things that we got to kind of wiggle around, I can heat up this leg and use some pliers to shift it to line it up perfectly in the hole. So anyway, that's how to set up those boards. Alright, so here I've installed the circuit board into the case. And just to make a few notes about how I go about this process. One, you'll see again, these smaller parts are not soldered in yet. That allowed me to kind of adjust to any small sort of tolerances or things that got twisted or anything that's not just perfectly aligned. Anyway, so I often take the other side here and I just kind of try to like wiggle and center and even up the height of these controls as much as I can. Sometimes things are not exactly perfect, so as far as like this being perfectly flat depends on how you soldered all the other pots and all that stuff. So anyway, just trying to adjust for things that can be slight inconsistencies just from the manual process. Here are the ribbon cables that are going to attach to the other board. I'm going to solder in the foot switch first. I have the foot switch pointing to the right. Well, as it's flipped over, pointing to the right, because the power jack's going to fit in here, and that capacitor that's on the underside will fit nicely right in there, leaving room for the battery down below. So anyway, at this point, I'm gonna solder in the wires here. I'm going to solder in, I'm usually typically just start by soldering in the big lugs on any of these mini potentiometers first, and then I actually go in and I test it just to make sure that they're smooth, because if somehow something got shifted off, if I've only soldered in two, I can heat up one and kind of move it to get it so it rotates smoothly in the hole. Anyway, so that's basically my process there. I'll show you the final step process in the next clip. Okay, let me show you the rest of my process. I have soldered in the ribbon cable here. I've soldered in the foot switch down here. I've also soldered in this capacitor that's on the underside right there. I'm going to clip the excess leads off of those wires. The ribbon cable wires aren't anything that gets in the way. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of fold these wires so that I can push this board down, and I'm going to install it on the jacks, the audio jacks. Okay, and then the next step is to take a battery snap. It says BLK for black, for the black wire right there. And it says red for the red wire. Okay. So now what I do is before I solder in anything here, I go here and I check and I look, okay, this power jack isn't exactly lining up with this hole, so I use needle nose pliers. I get in there and I desolder that one place, or I shouldn't say desolder, I heat up the solder joint of that one spot that I had soldered in to hold it in place. And then once it's heated up, I move and center the power jack so it's centered in the hole and flush with the wall. And then after that's done, I solder everything in place. Now, one thing about this circuit board as well, you'll notice that I've actually folded down some of these transistors and the voltage regulator here, just to give it as low of height as possible so that there's clearance for to put on the back plate. So at this point I go in and I solder in all the jacks. So these audio jacks are actually unique. They're Neutrik NMJ6HCD2, which is actually pretty standard, but then it's -SM, which stands for sleeve mated. And what makes that unique is that it allows you to use any type of 1/4 inch jack, whether it's TS or TRS. You don't have to use a TS cable, and it's not because this does balance. This is all unbalanced, of course, but it allows you to use whatever cables you got, because what it does is how it turns on the pedal, the power to the pedal, is all you've got to do is plug anything into the input jack, and the sleeve, the power jack is connected to one side of the sleeve, and then the other side is connected to ground. And so when you put anything in, it's sleeve mated, meaning that those two make connection. It turns on, completes the loop and turns on the power to the pedal. Okay, once I've soldered in the audio jacks, I take one more look at that power jack, and if it's off at all, I make sure to do any sort of shifting before I do final soldering. This was pretty close, so. And then I solder it up. I like to use 24 gauge battery snips because they don't seem to ever break. Okay, so now I'm just going to tuck this in, and there we go. We've got a pedal that is ready for testing. Now, before we do that, which actually I'm not going to put testing in the video. Hopefully you know how to test your pedal, and I'll eventually, if there's like how to set up some sort of trim pot or what the stock factory setting is for some things, I'll make sure to eventually note that. I just did want to note this one thing. So what I've done with the audio jacks is I've taken a 1/2-inch drill bit and I've beveled it in for a couple reasons. One, this plastic nut that comes with these jacks has a groove here that if you don't do any beveling, it makes the thing not sit flush. It looks kind of awkward. Also, this is how I ground the enclosure, or connect the enclosure to ground. So I take make a little O-ring of solder, and I hopefully you can see this. It's really small. There's a little O-ring right here of solder, and solder is a nice soft metal, so it works really great for this. And then I just screw it in, and then that O-ring, with the pressure of screwing it in, touches the enclosure, touches this ground nut, and grounds the enclosure. I do it on both sides just to be 100% certain that there's connection. And that grounding the enclosure makes it particularly so that if you were to touch it and provide some sort of alternate ground, it's not going to like hum on you when you're touching the pedal. Anyway, that's it. I think I've covered everything. I'm assuming, again, that you know how to read resistor values and solder and all those kind of things. There's lots of videos on that if you don't know how to do that. All right, thanks for watching.